So this is a version of a talk that I have given several times to various parties, to regulatory authorities, to academics, and so on. So the outline is very simple. So we're going to talk about our journey in AI, then a little bit about the advances in the current state of the art, a little bit about applications, and then trends and future directions. So everybody knows who we are, so we're not going to spend any time talking about Bloomberg. What most people don't know, though, is that we started working on AI applications all the way back in around 2008, 2009 timeframe. So this is over 15 years ago. Before transformers, before ChatGPT, before deep learning took over the world. And it was quite a different world back then. So this was not an obvious step to take. And the key question is why? Why would we go in this direction? So this picture begins to answer that question. So this is the aggregate number of ticks that we ingest. So that blip right there at the very, very far left end, that's the 2008 financial crisis. Right, so this is a fascinating picture because it's exponential at almost every time scale, and approximately 3 weeks ago, we crossed the boundary of 650 billion ticks per day. So this is an enormous amount of information. All of this information needs to be made intelligible, searchable, discoverable, and legible to our clients. And this is not limited to just ticks, right? We also ingest an enormous amount of other data, for example, news stories. All the way back in 2007, when I started at the company, we already were ingesting around 250,000 news stories per day, right? And today, that number is easily over 2.5 million per day. So it comes in 43 different languages from about 120,000 different sources, and there is simply no other technology that we had found that would enable us to make sense of this stuff, right? And there is a lot of valuable information that is disclosed to the market using this mechanism. So this is an example. This is one of the top US investment banks, and they were sued by the SEC in April of 2010. Right? So this is an interesting case study on how breaking news information is actually priced into the market. Right? So SEC back then did something unusual. So they published the announcement of a lawsuit only on their website and nowhere else, which meant that no one actually saw it for 3 or 4 minutes. Right? Until one of our journalists who had the foresight to build a filter for a very precise set of concepts like lawsuit, SEC, etc., saw it and wrote a headline that summarized this all into one line. So this is an interesting picture because if you had a machine that would enable you to capture those stories, like those SEC announcements, right, you could very much exploit this, right? And this happens all the time, as it turns out, in a variety of complicated circumstances. So, like, for example, FDA approval of drugs for rare diseases, things like M&A activity and other corporate actions, things like breakdown of negotiations in corporate actions, and a lot of other complicated phenomena like that. So there is no simple set of rules that would enable you to capture all of this. And machine learning and AI is really the only technology that we had found that actually allows us to adapt to this enormous amount of information coming in more and more modalities from more and more different sources. So now the pace of change in this field is frantic, and it's still accelerating, right? So to put this in context, I run a conference which is called Machine Learning in Finance. Last year was its 10th anniversary. So this year is going to be September 25 in New York. Please come. And when I started this in 2014, it was quite difficult to find enough speakers to actually fill the program. There were not enough people actually working on machine learning to talk about it. Conversely, last year when I was preparing the program, I had to read 1,300 abstracts of papers to find 8 speakers to choose, right? So there are literally thousands of papers about machine learning just in quantitative finance. So there has been a lot of progress in open weight models. So people have heard of Llama and DeepSeek and various others, right? There are new architectures being developed, attention variants, hybrid models. There are new training methodologies. new architectures like DeepSeek, agentic AI, and all of this leads to new applications like deep hedging, options pricing using stochastic differential equations based on neural networks simulation. And in fact, there are new conceptual directions which are introduced. So I was a physicist in a previous life, so this warms my heart. There is a new direction which is called machine learning with physical priors, right, where you're able to integrate neural networks with things like differential equations. There is more and more focus on things like algorithmic fairness, privacy, adversarial robustness, explainable AI, and the general concept of AI guardrails as these methods are applied in more and more mission-critical circumstances. So this is one way to quantify the progress. So the green models are the open weight models, and the red ones are closed source models. So this picture is due to a researcher whose name is Maxime Labon. He did a lot of work to put this together. And even a year ago, the trends were already pretty clear. So the open weight models have essentially converged to the proprietary ones, right? And this trend has not changed too much. So when we started, right, we started with simple things, with language understanding first, like topic classification and entity recognition, and then sentiment analysis, and then we added other things like novelty detection and market impact indicators. And then today, the domain of applications for this technology in our world looks something like this. So this is basically all of natural language understanding known to man, and a lot of other things that have nothing to do with language. So time series analysis and learning to rank, search, knowledge-based construction, and so on and so forth, right? So broadly, the applications of AI in finance fall into roughly 4 or 5 different categories, right? So one big category is basically signal extraction from unstructured data. So this has been ongoing for a long time. We have products in this space. There are other vendors that do this. Our clients do this, particularly in the hedge fund space. There is also execution-related activities. So once you know what positions you want to take, how do you turn that into actual trades? And this is increasingly done using deep reinforcement learning today. Then there is strategy development, where you're actually trying to come up with new ideas about trading strategies. So this is quite an interesting area because it's very opaque, not a lot of research in it. Then there is all the generative AI use cases for our clients. Most of that has to do with assistive tools, right, and assistants for various roles like traders, analysts, people doing data work, software engineers, and so on. And then last but not least, there is things like risk analysis and counterparty risk, fraud detection, and so on. So that's kind of the 10,000-foot view of the application space in finance. What has changed in the last 2 years since the introduction of ChatGPT in particular is that whereas previously people would just talk about this and contemplate doing something using AI or machine learning, now everybody is doing something, right? So generative AI in particular comes up in every conversation that I have with customers, and I have quite a few of them. So these generative language models are different from previous generations of AI. So they can be very high performing out of the box, right? They are trained on enormous amounts of text. They learn a lot of complicated semantics. So one model is able to learn and handle many tasks. They are quite broad, right? And they're uniquely accessible because you interact with the model directly using language, not code. So you no longer need to be a software engineer, right? And that is a huge difference, right? They are effective at many tasks, many text analysis tasks, but also significantly code generation. And this is important because this means that we can use these models essentially as universal language interfaces to other things. Right? So people, for example, have built tools using these LLMs to control things like drones and robotic arms, right? Or something like a bond calculator and other things along those lines. So these models are trained in quite an interesting way. I don't have a lot of time to go into this, but suffice to say that they learn a lot of interesting stuff from this synthetic word masking objective. So there has been an obvious and enormous amount of progress. So, and these models do show great promise. However, you can ask questions like, can these large language models reason and plan? This is actually a title of a paper. And the answer is definitively no. They don't do planning and reasoning the way that we do, right? So this is empirical. They don't see the way we do, so they don't understand optical illusions, for example, the way that humans do. So this is our research, right? And if you want to build something interesting for a domain where you need guarantees and you need proof, you need to build things which are a lot more complicated. So, an example of a system like that is something called alpha geometry. So this was by DeepMind a year ago. So I highly recommend reading that paper because it gives you an idea of what does it take to build a system that gives you guarantees and grounding. So these models, as powerful as they are, as interesting as they are, they do have substantial limitations. So limited context window due to computational complexity. We already talked about reasoning and planning. They encode all kinds of strange biases, hallucinations, right, or confabulations are an issue. And this is not a bug, that's a feature. Right? The reason this occurs is because there is no notion of epistemic uncertainty anywhere in the training process. Not in the data, not in the objective function, not in the training algorithm, nowhere. So cost of training of these models is enormous, which means that they're largely static. So you need things like retrieval augmented generation to access current information. That's actually quite tricky to get right. And the cost of inference is enormous. So, one client of ours, for example, estimated that they're spending $30,000 per month on inference, just doing API calls to ChatGPT. Right? Another major bank is spending over $100,000 a month, right? Because people are using this stuff to parse PDF documents, right? And do other simple things, right, that you could do much, much cheaper. So choosing use cases here is kind of tricky. So, there has been a lot of progress, right? And, there are some parallels, right, between what was happening in the 1960s and 1970s and what is happening today in terms of promises being made. I encourage people to look up AI 2027 to get an idea of what some people are saying about this. But there is no need for strong AI to feel the impact because weak AI can already affect enormous societal change, right? So various studies estimate that between 10 and 50% of all employment is at risk of automation in the next 25 years. All right? So, and the interesting part is that most people at risk are not even aware of it. So best case scenario is, as I said years ago, profound uncertainty and upheaval, which is exactly what we're seeing realized. If you want to know more, we have a QR code on the next slide that you can take a picture of. Right? The overall trends here, of course, are larger, faster, better, neural models for everything, hybrid models, agentic AI, copilots, deep reinforcement learning for training and simulation. A lot of people are doing synthesis using these generative AI models. So it's a great time to be a machine learning engineer. So if you have children in school and they're asking you what to study, this is not a bad place to go.